Revelation, thank you. Revelation chapter number 1. And let's stand together as we read this passage. Sometimes we say to our church, okay, Jesus is on property. Jesus is on property. He said, where two or three are gathered together in my name, there am I in the midst of them. And we see him here standing in the midst of his churches. So we like to say, Jesus is on property. It says in verse 12 of chapter 1, and I turned to see the voice that spake with me, and being turned I saw 7 golden candlesticks. And in the midst of the 7 candlesticks, one like unto the Son of Man, clothed with a garment down to the foot, and girt about the paps with a golden girdle. His head and his hairs were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were as a flame of fire, and his feet like unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace, and his voice as the sound of many waters. And he had in his right hand 7 stars, and out of his mouth went a sharp 2-edged sword. And his countenance was as the sun shineth in his strength. When I saw him, I fell at his feet as dead. And he laid his right hand upon me, saying unto me, Fear not, I am the first and the last. I am he that liveth and was dead. And behold, I am alive forevermore. Amen. And have the keys of hell and of death. And wow, he's our boss. You might work under a principal, and you might work under a pastor, and you might work under an administrator of some other title. But here's the boss. All right, this is the ruler. This is our God. This is our King. He is the reason you're here. He's the reason I'm here. He's the reason all these buildings are here. He's the reason church takes place in that building over there every Sunday and on Wednesday and other times. He's the reason. Amen? Him, right there. So keep him in view always. A Christ-centered ministry requires a Christ-centered life. Father, thank you so much for these students. Bless them, Lord, as they labor in preparation to communicate your truth to the hearts of children. We know you love them. You said, let the little ones come to me. And help these, I pray, Father, pound out a path that's clear and straight to you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Now then, let's go ahead and get a look at our textbook. And we're starting at page 13. We went over the bi-weekly last time, didn't we? I'm not sure if I had time. We kind of got in a hurry there toward the end of the last session. I can't remember right now. I should have reviewed that, and I failed to. But did you see this chart or this diagram?
I don't think we got to that one.
Okay, then look at page number 12. Let's take a look at this. This is the bi-weekly report that we used at the Baptist Christian Schools. And of course, you know, you've come here to learn how to do things, but you don't have to do things exactly the way we did them. I'm just giving you some ideas and some thoughts that you can use as you pursue the work of teaching in your classroom. But this is the form we used as the bi-weekly, and it was set up so that the parents could give us special instructions here. So because we had a status system, A status, B status, C status, and we defined what it meant. And then there were certain rewards each status earned for the students. And but the parents might have said in a conversation with us, they might have said, well, I want you to add, and once the parents got into this, they loved it, but they would say, I'd like you to add, don't hit your sister. I'm serious, stuff like that. So we'd say, okay, Johnny, here's what you're going to do to get your status, but this for 2 whole weeks, don't hit your sister. You say stuff like that. Take out the trash, help dad mow the lawn, whatever. And we try to incorporate the family with us. And I tell you, that made the parents our partners. Right. All right. We had a real good, strong partnership with the parents in the work we're doing. Page number 13. Let's talk about teaching by objectives. And then we'll talk about effective testing and controlled grading. Now, you've got to have a plan, of course, to reach your students' academic objective. And your students should have one if they're over 5th grade. 5th grade and above, we usually encourage students to have an objective for themselves, to own that. Below that is a little vague for kids. Sometimes the 4th graders could do okay, but mostly about 5th grade. Teaching by objectives. You need to have a plan in order to get your kids on board with you to work together toward the event called learning to happen in their life. And so our teachers were trained to be successful and so on. And again, what you're reading here, what you're using as a textbook for this class really is my manual that we use to orientate and to provide a kind of policy statement for our teachers and a procedures manual, kind of all wrapped up in one. But I want to you're going to read it, and like I said to the last class, there will be questions that will show up on your test that come out of the text that I don't cover directly in the classroom. There is material delivered in the classroom that's not in the text that will also show up in your test, which I think it makes it kind of convenient to have these things videoed. So you can kind of go back and review them and fast forward them and, and then go to the spot where you want to review. And all right, so teaching by objectives. I want to explain to you why teaching by objectives is not the same thing as teaching the test, okay? There are some teachers who've learned that one good way to get your academic average up in the classroom is just take the test. If you use a Becker curriculum or something like that, you've already got the test all pre-prepared. So you just take the test, put it on your desk, and teach it. And then have them memorize the answers. That's not effective. That will help them pass a test, but it's not conducive to learning. That event that occurs when an awareness of knowledge and its relationship to them in their life happens, and they embrace that knowledge and it becomes part of them. That's what you're looking for. And simply memorizing answers for a test really isn't achieving that. It doesn't completely circumvent that. That can happen even in that way, but it isn't the best way to facilitate that. So when I say teaching by objectives, here's what I mean. You know obviously that a good test, or you should know that a good test is one that is going to satisfy the teacher that the student got it. All right, got what mattered. Okay, a good test. A good test it really isn't a test that simply informs me they read the book or informs me they listened in class. Some teachers create a test that's designed to discover whether or not the students were listening. So they'll sometimes put in some obscure question, that it really doesn't matter. It doesn't really pertain in any real way to the price of petunias in North Africa, much less have any real value to them. I don't believe in that. I think a test should determine whether the students got what needed to be gotten, okay, and got the core of it. A good lesson is built around a core idea and a core thing you're trying to communicate, okay? There's all these peripheral things around that, but there's this main thing you want to get across. Did they get that? Not did they get some obscure illustration you used out here that's tangential to the main objective, but did they get this? This is what I want to know. On the other hand, we are interested in whether the kids have been paying attention. We do want to know if they've read their class, read their text and some of this. So therefore, our rule was this. 90% of the questions that are asked on any test had to be core. See? So that no student would score below 90% if they got the core. Now, for the students who want to excel, because 90% was our average, but 94 was the bottom of the A. See, our grading scale was pretty tight. Just 94 to 100 was the A. Above 80, you had to get 80. It was the bottom of the C in our school. So I think that's right. Anyway, but so it was a pretty tight grading system, and I can't get into that right now because there's a reason. A lot of study and research went into deciding on that grading scale, and it was decided upon picking up a school that had a whole different grading scale. I think 50 was the C or something. It was crazy. And after doing some research, I came to that grading scale, and it's amazing how all the A students continued being A students, and all the B students continued being B students, and all the C students continued being C students, but all at a better average. Isn't that interesting? It's just really an interesting phenomenon. And it's been studied a lot, and I proved it out in our school. That's exactly what happened. Yeah, you could get too ridiculous, 120% to get the A. I mean, we're getting silly. But the bottom line is you got core things you want to get communicated to the kids, and I wanted 90% of all questions to be about the core material. Now, 10% could be used for this other stuff, exploratory stuff, all right? And that would differentiate the super student, from the hardworking plotting student or whatever that's about. Who cares, right? Give me a plotter any day. They'll get more done in the end of a year, 9 times out of 10, than your superstars. But the bottom line is, that's the way we approach it, and it worked out real well for us. So teaching by objectives meant this. I would decide, for this lesson, I decided coming in what it is I wanted you to leave with, all right? I made that decision coming into the classroom. So I have a core of stuff I want to make sure gets in there, and that's what I'm going to test on. later on. And you'll notice I'll emphasize that stuff. I'll say it 3 or 4, 5, 6 different times in different ways. I'll come at it from 3 or 4 different angles, but say basically the same thing over and over and over and over again. Because there are about 4 or 5 core things I want you to walk out of the classroom with. And that's basically what we did. So we would test or teach by that objective. I sit down and I think, okay, now here's all the material I got to cover, but what do I really need them to get? Name it, 4 or 5 things, okay? All right, that's my core. I'm going to cover all the material. Maybe, maybe not, but I'm going to definitely get that core out there, all right? So that's the strategy of teaching by objectives. And then effective testing is, I've already kind of commented on it, some measure. I don't think it's an effective test if I just find out what kid is able to like have a photographic memory or some weird facility and they're able to hear and remember everything that they hear. I wonder if they learned it, see. And so my interest is not in discovering who's the best student. My interest is in making sure the students learn. See, that's my focus. So my testing needs to be aimed at finding those who learned. All right? Now understand something else about tests. When you test your students, who else is getting tested?
Teachers.
That's right. You've heard that before. That's good. That's very important. Every test you give the students, you're testing yourself. You're testing your effectiveness in that classroom, how good a job you did. Now, again, not entirely. I mean, there is some responsibility that's on that side of the equation. There's a teacher responsibility and learner responsibility. And you can't take full responsibility for learner failure, all right? But you do have teacher responsibility for communication. So my point is, if you put out a test, what we did was this: if a teacher put out a test and it went way below class profile, we talked about that, you know what I'm talking about, went way below class profile. Well, before we called the teacher in for the conference, that teacher will have already asked herself the question or himself the question: did I fail to communicate the core? Did I get off on the tangentials? See? When I prepared the test, now by the way, we used Abeka, so we had tests pre-prepared. However, our teachers were required to study the tests themselves and sometimes rewrite the test. And I would let them do that because I taught Abeka too, and I found sometimes the tests weren't really very well written. Sometimes they ask questions like, where did that come from? You know, and they'll defend it because I've called them and they'll defend it. Here's the reason they got this rationale. I said, well, good for you. You've thought it through. I'm glad you thought it through. Goodbye. Have a good day. I'm not going to use that question. It's a stupid question. It has nothing to do with anything. And so it's almost like a trick question or something. You never use trick questions, stuff like this. Sometimes students will think it's a trick question, but it's not a trick question. And we can get into testing perhaps another time. We have a limited amount of sessions, so we can't get into everything we might like to get into. But when we talk about an effective test, we talk about effective testing, here's the thing I want you to remember. First of all, you're going to test for the core. You're going to test for how effective you were at communicating the core. And when you prepare and present your test, you're going to make sure that the questions are clear and they're not obscure. You never use convoluted language in a test. Now, at your level, master's level, okay, you guys are way up there, it's a different kind of a thing. It would be a legitimate interest on the part of the teacher, perhaps, to test for reasoning skill, you know, in terms of noodling through a question, try to figure out what is this question asking me. I would use very few of those. You might find 2 of them out of 100 question tests. Some of you were going, 100 questions? I don't know how many questions, yes I do, but I'm not going to tell you. But anyway, so, you know, out of 100 questions, you might find 2 of those from me at this level. But I would put none of those in grammar school. There would be no question that's convoluted. And therefore, when I'm writing a question, it's not, I rarely use compound sentences for anything below 4th grade or 4th grade and below. For 5th grade and above, I might use compound sentences. But for see, I'm getting into that, and I don't want to go into that. That's not core today. Let's get back to core. All right. They're having fun. or not. I'm not sure we can come through the wall there. But in any event, so effective testing is going to be a test that's going to give you the right information about what's going on in your classroom. Because a situation where a class fails a test should not be taken as necessarily a negative. It could be the most positive thing that happens to you the whole year. It could be the moment of truth. It could be that moment of reality. It could be that moment where you discover what you're working with in your classroom. Because all the other testing you did coming in should have helped with that. We do a lot of that. At our school, we had, again, like I said, the CAT, my tests, and mechanics tests. We did a lot of testing. So we really avoided a lot of this kind of a problem. But most schools don't do that. Now, you're probably going to teach for a school that does not do that. They do their testing at the end of the school year. And so you're using test results from the end of last school year when they've had a whole summer to go into brain mush, many of them. And so you're kind of starting over again. And I didn't like doing that, but most of you are going to teach in that kind of an environment. And so if you do, the first couple of tests are very important to you, because that's where you're going to find out where your students are and where you are. And you're going to make a lot of adjustments in how you approach your class, and you're going to make a lot of adjustments in terms of how they're seated. You're going to make a lot of adjustments after the first couple of tests if you're paying attention to using your tests effectively, okay? So use your tests. Don't think it's just about putting a grade in a grade book. It's about finding out where your students are, okay? And how well you've been doing in communicating with the students. And so we go into developing test questions and stuff like that, but and you need to read that. And let's go on to page 21, control grading. Now, with regard to control grading, here's a formula that I hammered out while I was teaching that really worked well for me. I discovered, and again, I was teaching junior high, and junior high are, you know, they have their own set of challenges. They're very different. They go through a transition right there where they lose humanity and find it somewhere later on, you know, lose their ability to reason. They're beautiful, love them, love junior high kids. But that was my task. I had to teach junior high. Now, I learned that quizzes are very, very important. All right, a little quiz, a couple of questions to get things going, to kind of get the juices moving, and also for me to kind of feel how it's going out there. All right, kind of touch around out there a little bit in their brains and see if their brains are still active and if there's anything going on in there, and stuff like that. So I would use questions usually at the prep of each class, 4 or 5 questions, and then I would use a quiz, at least one quiz for any test that covered 1 week of material as the administrator. So I come into the administration position and I'm thinking back to my days as a teacher, and I'm thinking, you know, I want my teachers to be on the same page with this, and I want to set certain minimums. And so the minimum was this: they had to, it was necessary to present 1 quiz before any test that covered a week of material. All right? They had to have 2 quizzes, a minimum, for every test that covered 2 weeks of material. And and then any other testing would be the more general test, like the quarterly midterm exam or final exams, that kind of thing. We had those also. But so they had to have, in the grade book, I had to see a quiz grade for every test grade that covered 1 week of material. I had to see 2 quiz grades for every test grade that covered 2 weeks of material. See? That gave me a control mechanism so that I can know how to evaluate what's going on in the classroom. See? So the teacher, and also it helped the teacher because the teacher knew what was expected, and they knew that, I got to have a quiz, and they would plan in advance to set up their quizzes and set up their tests and all that kind of stuff. And so it just really, really helps, and it helps the parents too, because I'm sitting down with a parent who's got a question about how their kid's doing, and I can say, well, I forgot to mention, and they kept all of this in the student file. Every bit of it had to be kept. Any paper a teacher used to put a grade in the grade book had to be kept in the student file. Absolutely necessary, and you should do that for parent-teacher conferences especially. All right. So when the teacher would come in, they bring the box with me. I'd pull out the student's file. I can look at the grade book. I can look at the paper. I can see the paper behind every grade in the book. And when you do that with parents, it just completely solves a lot of problems and avoids a whole lot of conflict. Let's talk about discipline. We had very clear stipulated procedures in place for handling discipline in the classroom. And now I need a time check. Where are we at?
Almost 10.
It's almost 10 o'clock. Oh man, we're doing great. All right. The most important thing to get a handle on in managing your classroom is the area of discipline. Now, I've touched on it a couple of times already, but let me get into it a little bit more and give you a plan, a strategy. Your school might have one. The school you teach for might have something in place. Usually schools use something called demerits. And when a student misbehaves within certain definitions of the word misbehavior, they'll get a demerit and then another demerit. And when they get a certain number of demerits, then something else happens. And when enough of those something else's that happen, then something bigger happens, and so on. That's kind of the way most schools are organized. Now, don't leave my classroom and go work for somebody and say, boy, Pastor Scheibach thinks that your demerit system is really dumb. Don't do that to me. These guys are my friends, most of them, all right? I see them at pastor conferences. I come to leadership school, right? Don't do that to me. Because it's really not true. It's a matter of preference. But I am going to talk to you a little bit about this whole thing of discipline. And it arises out of a proper understanding of the child, him or herself. And so we're going to look back at that just a little bit. I think we looked at it already some, but look with me back to page number 55. And let's just remember a few things. Essentially, the problem we're dealing with is that a child has a heart condition, foolishness, deceit, and wickedness. These things are in the heart of the child. And they're there. And they're there by nature, okay, because of sin nature, because of their Adamic nature. Now, if they're Christians, if they're saved, that does give you some help. You've got something else to appeal to in there, the new man in Christ Jesus. You can appeal to that, and you should use it. But some of the kids, many of you will be teaching in open school enrollment situations, and even if it's a closed school enrollment, you'll have some lost children in your classroom. You know, the parents are praying like crazy, the kid will get saved and all that, and you're part of that, see? So the bottom line, even the saved ones, though, still have this stuff going on in them. The old man is still there, and it's foolishness, deceit, and wickedness. And we see the effects of sin. It confuses their ability to reason clearly. It dulls their hearing so they don't listen. It dims their insight. They can't see things very clearly. A little boy that was in our school who couldn't read, his name was Johnny, of all things. I don't know if you remember how Johnny can't read. They had already a big thing about Johnny can't read. And I had a little boy in my school named Johnny who couldn't read. And he was like in 4th grade, and he still couldn't read. Our students came out of kindergarten reading. Okay? So he was brought to me late. And so we established something called Reading Lab. I mentioned it in the last class. We established something called Reading Lab, partly in response to kids like Johnny that we were getting into our school. So it was a special class that the kids were rotated out and into and through during the course of the school day, where they would get concentrated tutorials on reading and go through the phonics and all of that good stuff. And this little boy simply refused to learn. And so I took over. More of us in his experience, because we wanted to do Reading Lab, we had this problem. Let me look into this. This looks like a good case for me to get my hands into it. Let me find out what's going on here. So I took Johnny aside, and he became my personal student. So during his Reading Lab time, he came to my office, and we sat together and we worked together. And it's a long story. The story is a successful one. It came out wonderfully, and I wish I could show you all the steps that led to our success. But I don't have time to do that, but I'll say this much. It was the application of discipline. See, this kid was foolish in his heart, just like I am too. You know, the difference is I understand it, and I have the Holy Spirit, and I have the Word of God, and I'm, that kind of thing. But this little boy was he was in bondage of foolishness, in bondage to his deceitful heart. And so I'm sitting there, and I've given him communication. He would repeat the communication to me, the instruction to me, so I knew he got it. I'd say, okay, I'll do it, and he wouldn't do it. Or he would do it weird. He'd do it some backward way and wickedness, turn things inside out. And then I'd say, what I tell you to do? And he would tell me something opposite from what I told him. And so it's an interesting and long story. Well, what I did, and I wouldn't recommend you do this because you can't do this these days. But before we got here, we did the incentive. You like baseball? Great. I like baseball too. I brought a baseball, put the baseball on the table. After we're done, we're going to go pitch some, right? You're going to pitch? You're good? Yeah. So I used that. I used every method you could think of. I used all that stuff. None of that was getting through. So I took a paddle and put it on my desk. Consequences. And I put my arm around somebody, and we developed a relationship. And by the way, one of the things I go through in great detail in the step 3, 57, is it starts with a relationship. If you don't establish a relationship with a kid, no amount of punishment, quote unquote, is going to be of any effect, because all it'll do is anger the kid. All you do is provoke him to wrath. So I'm sitting here, I put the paddle there and said, Johnny, you know I love you. And you and I have been working together a couple of weeks now, and we're not getting anywhere. Quite frankly, you're still not reading these words, and I know you can read them. You keep telling me you can't read them, but I know you can read them. And I knew he could. And so here's what's going to happen. I'm going to ask you to read this sentence right here. These words. There are 5 words in this sentence. It's very simple. I know you can read it. All right? Now, if you don't read it, I'm going to spank you. Okay? You look at me. This is different. I said, yeah, that's what's going to happen. You have to learn. You've got to learn how to read. I love you too much. I went to that kind of conversation about, I love you too much, man. I can't send you out here not reading. You can't read signs. You can't read a contract. You can't read anything. I can't do that. You're going to have to learn how to read. Your mom wants you to read. Your dad wants you to read. I want you to read. You need to read. If you don't want to read, we want you to read. So if you don't want to read for you, read for me. That kind of thing. We went through all that, right? So, and I said, no, that's, it's not working. You're not reading, so I'm going to have to spank you. I don't want to spank you. We went through all that. And so he looks back, and he messes up the reading and pretends that it was like, I just can't. I said, no, you're lying to me. You're lying to yourself. You're lying to me. So I swung him just a little, not hardly even knocked the dust off his britches. Just nothing. And then I talked to him again. And then next time I hit him a little harder. Pop. Then I'd see a little bit of dust. And then a little bit harder. And a little bit harder. And I just kept incrementally increasing it. And finally, it got to the place I was dusted his britches pretty good. Pretty good little pop there. Pop! And you can only go so far. Obviously, the parents have to take over and deal with anything that goes beyond, I can't bruise the kid and stuff like this, right? I got to be very careful about that. So I'm being very careful. It's a very, very thin paddle, by the way. It didn't hurt. It didn't sting, if anything. And it's the popping sound that gets their attention better than anything else. But anyway. So finally, he looks at me. He looks at the paper. He looks at me again. I'll never forget this. He looks back down. He reads it perfectly. Every word. So, hey, that's awesome. High five. Then he wasn't real happy. He wasn't happy about it. You caught me in my lie. See, he had been lying the whole time. He was always able to read it. Even in the classroom with the teacher before I got involved. He was able to read this, he just wouldn't do it. Now that's the case for Johnny, all right? There could be a different case for this one, that one. By the way, we had a list of things for teachers to look for eye issues, hearing issues. They had a list in front of them. The first 2 weeks of school, I forgot to mention that's another thing we did. We looked and evaluated every student for any hearing problem, any eye problem, stuff like that. We did all that work in the first 2 weeks of school. So we had eliminated those as concerns. We also would tell the parents, before we went to that kind of intensive thing, before they could even go into the reading lab, you got to have your student check for eyes. You have to have your student check for hearing. They had to. Then they could qualify to come into the reading lab. So I got to come back and remember to fill that in so you'll know what's going on there. So the 6 steps then of discipline, let's talk about that. It's based on a biblical understanding of the child we're working with. And here's how it worked. Every teacher was required to approach discipline in the same way. And it was 6 steps. And the first step was oral reproof. You're going to want to memorize these. Oral reproof. The second step was what we call physical control commands. I'll explain these in just a minute. Physical control commands.
Are you in the book?
They are in the book, but I like to see you right. So oral reproof, physical control command. The third thing is some kind of consequence, like a penalty. I might have used the word punishment in there. But some kind of penalty or some kind of consequence, like loss of playtime, you lose your break today. You'll sit in the classroom. You'll be standing by me during playground today instead of playing with the kids, that kind of thing. All right. The fourth thing was a parent notification. The parent notice, I wonder if I put a copy of that in here. I don't think I did. Shocking. Because that was one of our best tools. What I loved about the parent notice, we didn't call it a demerit. We called it a parent notice. And it had every imaginable offense listed with numbers 1 through 5 for reasons I'll explain in a minute. So you had talking out of turn, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Chewing gum in class, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. Kicking the chair, whatever. Just all these different class disturbance, stuff like this, with a blank on what they did, whatever. It was all there. So a teacher, it really facilitated the teacher situation because I want the teacher to teach. We're not there to discipline the children. We're there to teach them, all right? So I really want the discipline done at home. But some discipline has to be done at school. You just can't get around it. But I want my teacher to be able to get it done quick when they had to deal with something. So here's what would happen. Every single student was assigned a parent notice the first day of school. Ha ha. They didn't get sent home to the parents, but every student had a parent notice with their name on it and everything already there. So it didn't take long for the teachers to know which ones to keep on their desk. After the first 2 weeks, you already know which students are probably going to be the ones you're going to be interacting with quite often. So those are set up on the desk, they get to them quickly. A student misbehaves. Johnny, you know that you're not supposed to speak out of turn. That's been explained to you. I don't want to see you do that again. I don't want to hear that again. Do you understand me? Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Okay. And then they put a little mark by the name. Okay, that was number 1. Now the student does something different, disruptive in the classroom or some other violation. All right? Now the teacher says, Johnny, stand up. It doesn't have to be the same thing again. The second offense, whatever it is. Johnny, would you please stand by your desk? And now, watch how this works. So the kid stands up, stand straight. Put your hands by your side. Oh, you're doing this. Put your hands by your side. And as long as they don't have a look of submission and respect for the authority, the teacher continues with other physical control commands. I'm telling you, this really works. All the rest of the kids are like, and that kid's getting the picture. So until that kid is standing and now look me straight in the eye, eye contact, count to about 2. 1, 2. I don't count out loud. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000. All right. I think you understand that you need to obey the rules. You may take your seat. All right? But let's suppose he kept on. Oh, brother. Step 3. Well, you'll be spending your break time with me today, Johnny. Now, this is taking a lot of time, you're thinking, right? I get that. But you got to trust me on this. It doesn't have to happen more than about 3 times in the beginning of the school year, and you've got your class. And so you go through this thing, and then the students still, giving you the little flaring nostrils and all that stuff, and the eye glare, and looking at you like this, whatever. And just, okay, then you'll be spending your time during break with me today. You just lost your break. Okay, then you'll also be spending, and he's still not complying, right? And now, okay, then you're also going to spend your lunchtime with me. You'll be sitting next to me during lunch. And some kids like that. So someone wanted to come sit by you anyway, but usually those kinds of kids don't. So, so it works well for them. And so I just keep going. Now, finally, he's still misbehaving. All right, then you'll need to have a parent notice. I pick up the parent notice, and I circle real quick the things that the kid did that day on the number 1, the 3 of them, the 4 of them, whatever it is. And eye rolling is on the list, okay? Refusal to respond to the physical control command is on the list. It's all there. So it just takes a few seconds, and then, all right, so here's your parent notice. Come get it. And we watch how the child comes to get it. Whatever, stuff like this. So here's what happens. The child comes up and gets it. Now, take this and go see Mr. Scheidbach. And went to step 5. They're sent out of class. Now they come to my office and they're sitting there with their parent notice, right? And my wife, who served as my secretary then, and the 2 other secretaries we had there on board, whichever one was available, would have a talk with the child to ascertain these things. did your teacher tell you that what you were doing was wrong? Yeah. See, and you're not listening, are you? Did your teacher ask you to stand? Yes. See, the teacher is verifying for me that the steps were followed. We don't say that. I want to make sure the teacher, that's not, the teachers, the secretary is just asking those questions. I know that anyway, because I had a real good team and they did what they were supposed to do, but sometimes teachers get in a hurry and they don't want, get out of here! Don't see the principal! Sometimes they show up without the parent notice in the early part of the year. So we do the same thing with the teachers. Send the kid back, with the parent, without a parent notice. And why are you back? Because you didn't come here. Is it time to go?
No.
Oh, good. It's dark out there. That's kind of weird. Maybe we're the only ones here. Everyone else disappeared. The rapture. But anyway, see, I got to avoid telling you an interesting story about how we fooled a kid to think the rapture had happened and watched him screaming down. Anyway, that was very mean. I've repented of it, though, and I think the Lord has forgiven me. But anyway, so all that goes on. All right, now, let's suppose, though, that the teacher didn't offend and the student was there appropriately, according to protocol, according to procedure, according to policy. And so I take the student into my office and I have a conversation with him. And I whatever, I'm going to talk. I usually would open the Bible, read a couple of verses. And sometimes I'd pray. Sometimes I come around the other side, sit down next to the student, and just have a talk with him and just ask him some other questions. You having a bad day? What's going on at home? Did you have a fight with your brother? Because I usually know something about the family. I usually know something about the kid. And I'll use that. I have the time to do that. I don't want the teacher doing that. All right? The teacher might do that if the student complied and sat with them at lunch. Then the teacher might do that. How's it going at home? What's going on? This is not behavior I would expect from you. This kind of thing. All right? But now I've got the student, so I'll do that. And then if the kid's being belligerent and misbehaving anyway, I'll often say, pick up my phone, turn around, pick up my phone, hit the button. And, back then you had to do that. Now you got these cell phones. But hey, call so-and-so. And the kid goes, what? Yeah, let's have a chat with your mom. No, I'll be good, I promise. Do you promise? Yeah, I promise, Mr. Scheinberg, I'll be good. Because I know, okay, mom's doing something at home that's right, this is good. So I go ahead, all right then, we'll give you another chance. And then I'll put my little initial on the parent notice in a way that tells the teacher that I saw the student and that I'm happy to send the student back to class. The student goes back to class, shows the parent notice to the teacher sees my signature and knows he can receive the student back to class. Boom, we go on. If the student misbehaves another time in that day, the teacher has the discretion now to either send the student back with the parent notice, and at that point the student goes home. Or he has the option to restart the steps. I give that to the teacher because the teacher knows what they're dealing with there, right? And we can only allow a certain amount of disruption in the classroom. All right, you do that 2 or 3 times in the first couple of weeks of school, you will have identified where your problems are, and most of the students who are the borderline type, they've just stepped 3 steps back from the line, and they're not going to give you any trouble, very, very rarely. So that's important. So we don't use demerits, none of that nonsense. But if a student got, I think it was 3 or 4, that's my hand's ahead of my mouth. 3 or 4. Anyway, if you have 4, I can't remember which one it was, but a certain number of parent notices meant they're suspended for 3 days. All right? And then a certain number of suspensions meant that we would not renew the student's enrollment for the following year. We would usually tolerate them for the rest of the year if it was just that kind of stuff. But more serious things, then we wouldn't. See, my point there is we screen for behavior. I mean, we did. We didn't keep students who were disruptive in the classroom. We just didn't keep them. So that was kind of and we didn't keep students who didn't want to be there. Above a certain age. Now, kindergartners, nobody wants to be there. So we didn't have any students at all if we did that. But no, in high school, when they got to the high school level, if a student didn't want to be there, we didn't enroll them. We just tell the parent, no, he doesn't want to be here. Well, why does he get to decide? Well, he doesn't, but we do. And our decision is we don't take students who don't want to be here. All right. Let's go ahead and look at page 27. Yes. Oh, step 6 is they go home. Yeah, 5, they come see me. Step 6, they go home. Yeah. And sometimes the parents couldn't come get them, right? But we clarified this in earlier in the orientation. If you're not able to come get them, have someone designated who can. Because otherwise, again, it's like, here's what we did, and it worked. We had a daycare system, an extended daycare system for the students who had to wait till after, till maybe 5 o'clock or something like that before the parents could pick them up. And we had to charge for that, obviously. So what we would do is we would say, look, you have a designated person to pick up your student, or they go on the clock. In other words, if I had to have somebody babysit that kid for the rest of the day, it's I think it was $5.75 an hour, which is nothing, But that's what back then it meant something, and that would add up. If the kid got in trouble at 10 in the morning, yikes! And then they had to start paying $5 extra every hour that the student's there, because I had to hire somebody to deal with that, or I had to take some personnel, usually teachers' aides or playground supervisors were the people I would use for this, and they would have the job of keeping that kid with them everywhere they go all day long. It was a good system. It worked real well for us, and we had very little problem after the first 2 or 3 weeks. All right? Once we got the school year rolling, man, we were rolling. What time do I have?
You have like 2 minutes.
2 minutes?
So,
Man, nailed it. Just kidding. Let's stand together, please. I'll let you go a little bit early. That won't hurt anything. As far as your test is concerned, there will be quite a few questions. Most of them will be intuitive. Most of the questions you will be able to answer just because you've sat in the classroom, you've got the idea of what we're talking about here. And that will be all you need to navigate through probably 60% of the questions. About another 20 or 30% are going to be questions that will penetrate if you learn the core, okay? The other stuff's core stuff too. But the other ones are going to be knowledge of certain lists, like the 6 steps, knowing those 6 steps, stuff like that, understanding those sorts of things. Then there'll probably be about, 3% to maybe 5% of questions that are going to really, really be challenging, all right? The kind that'll penetrate just how brilliant you are. No, I'm just kidding around. But there will be the kind of question where I'm going to be asking if you can take what you've learned and use it to noodle through a certain problem. I don't know, what would you do in this case, or whatever, that kind of thing, okay? All right, those are the hardest ones to grade, but they're also the ones that tell me the most about what happened in the classroom. Father, thank you so much for these wonderful students. Bless them, Lord, in their pursuit of the hearts of children, to give them you. And I pray this in Jesus' name, amen.